The National Defence Force confirmed on Wednesday that 2 soldiers were killed and 3 others injured in the DRC after a mortar bomb landed inside one of South Africa's contingency military bases. Now, the soldiers are part of the Southern African Development Community mission out in the DRC. Joining us to further unpack this is Mr. Piers, Pigou, who is Southern Africa Program Head at the Institute for Security Studies International Crisis Group. Piers, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Look, talk to us about how well resourced these missions are. Do they have additional support on the ground as well as air? And basically, how are these teams put together?
Good evening, Alicia, and good evening to the listeners, the viewers. Look, when an assessment was done earlier this year about the needs for such a mission, a budget was attached to that, which was close to $1 billion for the mission. What we're seeing in terms of the deployment at the moment is quite clearly a much reduced budget, what you might call counterinsurgency on the cheap in some respects. There are serious concerns from a number of analysts who are watching this, and we should point out that we are also trying to analyze the situation in a larger vacuum of information, that there's not a lot of detail that is made public. So we have to rely on a range of different sources, official and otherwise, to try and piece together a picture of what's going on. But the general picture is that this deployment by the SANDF and by SADC in general is not going to be adequately resourced, particularly with respect to the lack of air assets that are available. No helicopter gunships. When they took on the M23 in 2013 as part of the Force Intervention Brigade, they had Royfalk attack helicopters. These are not available to them now, and they're facing an enemy in the form of the M23, and that's but one of the enemies that they are facing in the Congo, which is very well equipped, much more so than it was 11 years ago.
Now, talk to us about the coordination between South Africa and the DRC. How is this actually managed, Piers?
Well, again, we don't know. We haven't seen the status of forces agreement, which essentially would be the agreement laying out what the framework would be of interaction. What exactly is SADC doing there? Is it there in support of Congolese operations, or will it operate separately? So we don't have a sense of what those modalities are at the moment. Ideally, they should be working closely with the Congolese armed forces and with their intelligence communities. Their campaign strategy will be contingent, or the quality of their campaign strategy will be contingent on the quality of the intelligence they have. And that will be dependent on what they're able to get themselves, but also what they can get from the Congolese. Bear in mind, the South Africans have been present in this space for the last 11 years, albeit under a UN hat. So they're not coming to this blind to the situation.
Now, look, why then did SADC, speaking of SADC and South Africa, withdraw from the Mozambican mission, Piers?
Well, this is still an unanswered question as to what has informed this decision. There's a lot of speculation that it's about Mozambique wanting them out. There's some claims within the SADC family that they've achieved what they needed to achieve, and it's time to move. Already within 6 months of being deployed, they were talking about an exit strategy in January 2022. That's 2 years ago. So they've been looking for a way to leave. But I think one has to look at the security situation, which has deteriorated again in the last few weeks in Mozambique, to show that the removal or the exit of SADC forces is only going to benefit insurgents on the ground, and we're likely to see that space being filled by greater attacks on communities where SAMIM was operating before. We're not sure whether the Rwandans will be able to extend their presence and take over responsibility in those areas, and we're pretty sure that Mozambican forces are not in a position to do so. So lots and lots of unanswered questions about what that drawdown will actually look like and whether they will be gone by the middle of July, as many are predicting that.
Now, look, there's also currently active presidential authorizations for the ongoing deployment of 12,473 personnel. Talk to us about some of the dangers of this, Piers.
Well, I think the big problem here, I mean, that's authorization for a number of missions internationally and domestically. Let's bear that in mind. And South Africa is not bearing the costs for all of that, so certainly not the UN missions. But it does stretch us extremely thin in the circumstances, and particularly with respect to deployments where we know there's going to have to be rotations of forces. So when you're deploying in a place like Mozambique or in the DRC, you're not just talking about the forces that are there, you're talking about who will replace them on the rotation process and the logistics and the supply dynamics that accompany that. So these are complex and expensive operations. I think the biggest challenge is, can we sustain the costs of such an operation? It's certainly encouraging to see more African states stepping up to the plate to pay for these things. But if we're going to do this at a cheaper price, so to speak, and in the process undermine the potential of what we're putting on the ground, then there are some real dangers potentially there. So, this is something which we're going to have to watch very, very carefully.
Thank you so much for that. That is Mr. Piers Pigou there.